Dr. Stanley Beecham. Welcome back to the podcast for a third time.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to see you again. I
Yeah,
like your haircut.
Man, it's particularly good to see you because we've both been through a little bump in the last few years since we last talked, haven't we? My listeners
Yeah.
are very familiar with my little hiccup. Could just talk our listeners through yours.
So in July of 2023, I was diagnosed with acute promyelocytic leukemia. It's a type of leukemia it's a genetic transformation. They don't even know what causes it. So it's not like you got exposed to something. It's just one of these random acts of the universe. About 4 people in a million get it.
Fuck.
Anyway, I was getting my health was deteriorating and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought I had bronchitis because I was having trouble in my chest and, breathing. So I called the doctor about getting an inhaler, and she said, well, when you come in, we'll check your blood. And so at 10:30 at night, I get a call from the doctor's office telling me to go to the emergency room.
Shit.
And I was like, I'll go in the morning, and they're like, I told the nurse, I said, just tell the doctor I'll go in the morning. She said, well, let me call the doctor back. So she calls me back 50 minutes later and she says, no, you don't have that kind of time. You need to go tonight. So I found out about 7 o'clock the next morning that I had leukemia, which explained why, it felt so bad, for the last several weeks. And I got to stay in the ICU for 25 days.
Jesus.
And they started my chemo, which lasted 100 rounds of chemo. So I started chemo in July of 23, and I finished it in February of last year. And, it was sitting in the hospital for 25 days with kind of nothing to do.
Yeah.
That was actually really interesting just to observe how I was experiencing that. And it was interesting because it was really clear to me that I might die and that I was, close to the edge.
Yes.
And after I got over the surprise of that and realized, yeah, I'm in a really vulnerable place right now, I kind of went straight into like, okay, what do I want to do with this? And so I kind of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't become a victim of it all, and feel like I got a bad shake, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I did things like when I got up in the morning, I would get out of the bed and I wouldn't get back in my bed. I would, sit in the chair, and I even walked around some after I got feeling better. And I never wore the hospital clothes. I had my own clothes and I wore my own clothes. And so I found, that, just like in any life situation, there's some things you have no control over, which can be a lot of things. But there's always one or two things that you can take ownership of. And I knew this from my own work and my own study, and that you focus on the things you have control over, not the things that you don't have control over.
Yes.
And so, wearing my own clothes, and really the only other decision I got to make was, what I had to eat. They would come around in the morning with a menu and I could pick my food. Of course, I was limited on the things that I could pick. But I really just got focused on, controlling the things that I could control. And accepting the fact that, this may not end well for me.
Yeah.
But I can control my attitude and my approach to it. And so, yeah, it was, actually when I look back on it kind of fondly, because I think it really informed me. I think, I'm just more aware of the fact that there's a randomness to the universe that affects all of us, but we don't think about it because the way I think most of us live our lives, we act as if we have control over things that we really don't.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Like we're just not conscious of how vulnerable we are, that, that any moment, your life can change in a significant way. And so, living through something like that for such an extended period of time, I just see that now as kind of the new norm. It's always been that way. I just didn't know it. it wasn't so much that life changed. It's just my awareness and how I thought about it, and this the concept of being vulnerable, and that there's no promises and no guarantees. So when I was in the hospital in ICU for 25 days, I thought a lot about, if I live, what am I going to do differently? Because I said, I can't just go back to doing, things exactly the way I did. And I think what I learned in that time is that the things that I take the most joy from and appreciate the most are actually just simple, basic things like, going for a walk, having a meal with some friends. That it's not, it's not the big stuff, that most people think is what makes life great. I think it's the simple day-to-day activities that is really what it's about. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a guy in the hospital with me, and he left, and so I thought he was fine, and he came back about 2 weeks later, and I could walk around on the unit, but I couldn't leave the unit. It was kind of like being incarcerated in prison, because we have no immune system, so you can't leave the unit because you're too vulnerable to get sick. So, but you had to put a mask on when you left your own room, and people had to put a mask when they came into your room and cover themselves up, in plastic gowns and the whole thing. And so I remember talking to this guy, and I said, what are you back for? And he said, well, I think it was either T cells or a bone marrow transplant. I can't remember. He said, I'm back to get this transplant. And I said, so what's that supposed to do for you? And he said, oh, they tell me if I do this, I can live 3 more months. And this was a guy that was about 40, and I was 61 at the time. And he's saying this very matter of fact, I mean, there's no emotion in his voice. It's just like, just two guys having a conversation. And I said, well, what are you going to do with your time? And he's like, well, I'd like to go to the beach one more time. And then he said, then I just want to sit on my back porch with my dogs and watch them run around in the yard. And he was dead serious about this. And that was kind of my first cue of like, yeah, that's what makes life really good, and delicious is you enjoy, watching your dogs play in the backyard, or, watching your kid crawl around on the floor, or, having a meal with a friend. It's not all the big stuff. So that's really stayed with me, and that's really been helpful.
That's interesting, Stan, that was the big thing that you took from it. I had just mentioned to you, and all my listeners know, that I went through open heart surgery, which was a bit of a surprise, finding out from a check with my cardiologist that I was born with a dodgy valve that would kill me. And I remember walking out of there and him saying to me, you need to have open heart surgery, and going home. The first thing, it's interesting, isn't it, that what you expose yourself to tends to come up in those moments. And you've had a life of being a psychologist, working. You've wrote a brilliant book called Elite Minds. You've worked with elite athletes about optimizing the mind all your life. You've worked with business consultants. I'm in a similar space. But as you probably know, I'm quite into Stoic philosophy. And the words of Seneca rung in my ears as I walked out of there, which was, I pity the man who's not faced adversity, because he's not faced an opponent, and nobody, not even him, knows what he's capable of. And I remember going home and I wrote the words worthy opponent on my bathroom mirror. And my whole idea was this was my worthy opponent that was going to test and develop me. But it's only because of all the stuff that I've been exposed to that then kicks in, right? And my natural bent, and probably yours as well, would be, because I'm a ridiculous optimist, and I'm going, this is all going to be fine. But I actually I remember forcing myself and going, no, you need to find out exactly what the risks are, and you need to prepare yourself. So I went. You go.
No, I was just saying, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to find out if I'm a hypocrite because all the things that I've been,
Yes.
telling other people, to think about or how to approach it. And I remember asking myself the question, like, are you going to become a hypocrite? Are you going to become a victim of all of this and feel sorry for yourself? And, you're talking about the Stoics. I love this saying, amor fati, lover of fate.
Yes. Yes.
Of really, if you, here's the way I think about it. If you can really want your life and not somebody else's life, if you can want your fate, even if it means you die younger than you wanted to, or, you lose a loved one or whatever, if you can really understand the acceptance and then the love of one's fate, then you have no regrets and nothing bad happens to you. Right? I mean, you can think of having leukemia or having heart surgery as a bad thing, and people say, "I'm sorry." Well, it doesn't have to be that way. I talk to people in business, and they lose a lot of money or they lose their business, and and they recovered from it away, and they look back on it and say, thank God I learned that lesson early on.
Yeah.
I'm glad I went bankrupt when I was 30 and not, when I'm 60. And I know it sounds kind of trivial to, to say that out loud, but it's really quite possible that you can fall in love with your own life and the fate of your own life, even the tragedy of it. Because I can tell you what, when I was in ICU for 25 days, getting, leukemia every day, I felt more alive in that hospital room than I think I ever have my entire life. I mean, I was fully aware. My mind was, I was paying attention to every moment. And I was really deliberate and intentional about simple things that, simple decisions, because even the simple decisions had some value to me.
Yes. Yes. And that, it's really interesting that you bring up amor fati, that love of fate, because, the thing, I've been a big believer. In fact, I've got a tattoo on my arm, memento mori. So, particularly Marcus Aurelius said to himself over and over again, remember that you are mortal, Marcus. And his whole idea was to remember it, not to be morose, but to remind yourself that life is a precious gift. And so when I found that out, I forced myself to go and look at what's the risks of death. And then I forced myself to contemplate my own death. Now, my risk of dying was surprisingly low, actually. Less than 1% fatalities on the operating table. And I thought, well, I'm pretty fit. I've got a good chance. But I actually forced myself to confront that possibility. Not to be negative, but from that perspective of the sort of Japanese psychology slant of arugamama, with things as they are, what needs to be done. So I thought to myself, well, you need to get your affairs in order. You need to shoot some videos for your kids in case you do go. And I actually forced myself to contemplate my own death. The thing that I really got into was amor fati, and trying to go, well, fuck, if this is it, right? If this is it, this is the big step for me. Can you love your fate, right? Can you say, hey, this might well happen and you might well go? Can you actually embrace? Because for me, that's the last big challenge of the Stoics, is to love your fate, even when you get a shit sandwich from the universe. And the thing that
everybody gets one.
Oh yes, we're all going to get one. And some people have had their unfair share of shit sandwiches from the universe, right? But the thing that really struck out for me, I'm not sure about you, was just reflecting on my life and going, well, if this is it, I'm content. And for me, that was the big take home out of that whole ordeal, is that the goal of life should not be happiness, because that's a fucking fleeting emotion that people chase. The goal in life should be contentment or serenity. And I actually started using this to reflect back on my life and going, fucking hell, I've had a good run. I've done some amazing shit. I've met some awesome people. And if this is fated to be it, then it is what it is. And I was kind of at peace with it. I knew that, the things I would be sad about was not seeing my kids grow up, not growing old with my wife. But to your point, Stan, what it really did is it made me really be much, much more mindful in just daily life. I don't mean sitting down and meditating. I mean smelling the roses, walking around, taking my dogs out, just enjoying seeing my dogs run around with their tails wagging, looking at the colors of the sky, Isn't it strange that we have to go through something so confronting to really get to the essence of what life is?
Yeah, I think it's a realization that, you may actually lose your life. It would come to an end. And again, walking right up next to that and having that experience of being close to your own death, I think can be really informative, because now it's going to happen. It didn't happen that time, but it is going to happen. I am going to die, and it's probably not going to be on my terms, right? It's probably not going to be when I think it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. Because I remember when they told me I had leukemia, I was really surprised. I remember thinking, I didn't see that one coming, Heart disease, I'd thought about that, because I've had people in my family die of heart disease. But I just remember thinking, wow, I never thought that's how I would die, and now that might be how I die. And I remember when I don't know if it was the first or the second day I was in the hospital, one of the nurses came around and, they ask you all these questions, and you fill out all these forms about, do you want to be resuscitated or not?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if they did that with you. And I remember telling her that I didn't want to be resuscitated, and if anything happens, just let me go. And I could see that she was really surprised by that. And she said, I don't think you understand what I'm saying, because evidently most people say, yeah, do everything you can to keep me alive. And here's this, stupid son of a bitch saying, no, don't try to keep me alive. Just let me go. And so she asked me several times, because you end up having to sign. And I said, yeah, don't resuscitate me. Don't do anything. If it's my time to go, it's my time to go. I don't want to lay in the bed for months, before I die. I'd rather just, go right away. I don't want to prolong my dying.
And
But I just remember.
Sorry, Stan, I was just going to ask, was that linked to this amor fati idea, this love of fate?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was just if this is how I'm going to go, whether I go now or in a month from now, it doesn't matter. Not really, not to me. What I didn't want to do is be a burden, because I think, what's interesting is, so while I was fighting for my life against leukemia, my father had dementia and he was progressively dying. And in fact, he died the week before I finished my chemo.
Shit.
And so that was a real irony, right? As I was fighting to stay alive, and there was nothing he could do. And so I'm watching him deteriorate as I'm slowly getting better. And I remember thinking, that's really, that's a unique experience, right?
Yeah. Sometimes the universe
those
is
two
fucking
events.
wicked.
Yeah. But, I remember just hoping that he would go ahead and die because his quality of life was so bad.
Yeah.
It's like we treat farm animals, with more humanity than we do humans. Just people laying in the bed for months at a time. It's just so I'm glad that didn't happen to me.
And what did you make any deals with yourself? Because obviously as you're going through that, there's a shit heap of stuff that goes through your head. Did you make any deals with yourself around, if I get through this is what I'm going to do differently?
Yeah, I spent, actually, when I was in ICU for 25 days, I spent a lot of time thinking about that, if I have a little bit of time left, how do I want to spend it? I was thinking about more from the standpoint, if I just have a couple of years left, what will I do? And the main thing that came to me is I'd like to go back to Spain and walk the Camino de Santiago again, which I actually did the month after I finished my chemo. I went over and walked the whole thing again. But I remember just thinking, I really would like to do that again. And I remember thinking, I want to keep working, but I don't want my work to define me the way that it did. I think too much of my identity, and I think it's true for a lot of men, I know it is in the U.S. and I would imagine it is in Australia as well, that so much of your identity is what you do. People say, it's one of the first things we ask somebody is, what do you do? And then you tell them what your job is, right? And I remember, thinking, I don't like the fact that so much of my identity is in my work and in my occupation, and that how I think about myself is so much tied into how well, business is going. That when business is going really well, I feel better about myself and that kind of thing. And I just remember thinking that's kind of hollow, like that's. But now I still work, but I work for a different reason. I work because I realize I have to work because I need something to focus on that's not me. I think when people don't stay busy or they don't have a job or they don't have activities, that when people talk about I'm bored, what I think happens is when you aren't engaged like that, there's a lot of time to sit around and think about yourself, right? And I don't think that's good. I know it's not good for me. In my senses, it's not good for most people. So, one of the benefits of having work or having other people in your life is that you don't focus on yourself all the time and you don't think about yourself. And I know that my best days are when I'm busy doing other things or helping other people, and I just don't think about how's Stan doing and how's his day going. Those truly are my best days. So I have to fill them with something. And as long as I can still work and be of help, I think I'll keep doing that. But I say that because I think a lot of people, they don't have enough going on. They don't have enough activity, but challenging activity. You know what I'm saying? It's one thing to go and find something to do. It's another thing to seek out something that's really difficult. Because I think we should take on as much challenge, responsibility, and difficulty as we can tolerate. Like, that is really being fully alive. When you have a full plate and you're taking on as much as you can. Not more than you can handle, because now you're overly stressed. But what I'm saying is, I think a lot of people, they actually hurt themselves because they don't take on as much responsibility as they actually could, or they don't try to do difficult things. And again, I'm not saying try to do things that you can't do. I'm saying go right up to the edge of yourself, right? And do as much as you can. Like, that really is the best life.
That is where you feel alive, right? And it's linked to, there's a couple of things I want to unpack in what you just said. The first one was around identity, because again, that was an interesting thing for me, around, you do a lot of self-reflection when you are facing your own mortality. You certainly did, and I did. And I had to force myself to overcome my optimism bias, because I wanted to actually use this opportunity to properly meditate on my death and actually stare into the abyss, as you've talked about, and actually, take out the lessons of life. That identity thing, you will have seen this more than me. I've seen it a lot with business people who retire. I've seen it with athletes who retire. You will have seen it with a lot more athletes who stop playing, that they fall into an existential crisis because their identity is so wrapped up in the stuff that they do. And I was coaching a guy who was an athlete who just was a quite a big athlete, but then got injured, career over, and my coaching with him was to try to get his identity around his character and his values rather than his job. Because when we connect our identity to what we do, fucking hell, we're on thin ice, aren't we?
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't. It won't sustain you the way I think people think. Again, it's a societal message, right? Go to school, study hard, get a good job, get promoted, move up the food chain, and then you'll have a good life. That's the story we're told, right? And versus, do something that you really enjoy doing, that you're passionate about, that you care about, that you can, throw yourself into. So, they talk about, in the research, when people get into a flow state or in the zone, there's no sense of self. Like, there's no me doing it. I become the activity that I'm doing. It's not that I'm doing the activity. It's that the activity and I are one thing. You can think about, musicians talk about this, right? When they're having a jam session, artists will do that. I mean, it's hard for corporate people to get into it, but you can. But that's really what we should be seeking is this experience of being one with what you're doing, because you're so engrossed in it and you're so focused on it, and not versus thinking about what I'm doing. Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
When you're really doing it, you're not thinking about how well you're doing it. That all goes away.
Yeah.
As well as distortions in time. And then the other thing you see when we get in these flow states is even when we're doing things really difficult, we experience them as effortless. So what that tells me is the problem is not doing the difficult task. The problem is becoming too aware of oneself or judging oneself when you do the task. Like, if you can just do the hard thing without judging yourself, you'll find that you can actually do a lot more difficult things at a higher level than you ever thought. So the problem isn't really doing the task. The problem is the self-doubt and the self-judgment that you have in the process of doing the task.
I want to connect that flow state, which is the optimal state, and anybody who's ever been in it knows it is an awesome state. And I think a lot of people, if they're in business in life, they could probably relate to that in a time in sport or something where they were doing something challenging, where they were immersed in it. But for me, the next step, because we can't be in flow 24/7, right? But the next step to flow, or close to flow for me, is this idea of being fully engaged in life. And this comes from the research around hardiness. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the hardiness research around control orientation, challenge orientation, and commitment orientation. And part of that commitment orientation is that people who are highly committed are fully engaged in their activities of life. Like, they're curious about life. And these people, they seem to have that zest for life. No matter what they're doing, they're in it. They're completely in it. Where there's a lot of people who are just fucking blah, and who are half doing stuff. And I always, and that's why I have that memento mori tattoo on my arm, is to just look at it and remind myself, fucking hell, this day could be your last. Why not just be into shit rather than just go through the motions, right?
Yeah.
What other lessons or reflections did you come up with? I think there was two that you talked about to start, and I want to make them overt for listeners.
Okay.
That idea of what you said without saying it was that Stoic idea of play your given roles well. That Epictetus said we are all actors in a play, and that sometimes we get a part that we don't want. And he's basically talking about the universe and the shit sandwich from the universe. But that our focus in life should be to play our given roles well. And you clearly stepped into that, where it was like, well, if I'm fated to have leukemia, how do I do this well? And that was the same with me with my heart surgery. If that's my fate, how do I play this role well? That's one that I want to highlight, and we can dive into that a little bit deeper. But that whole idea of focusing on what you can control is really important. You talked about your little routines and what you did. I actually did, and I don't think I've told anybody this before, but Carly couldn't believe it. In ICU, when I first woke up from heart surgery, I got out of bed and did 10 squats because I just wanted to focus on something that I could, and I wanted to lean into this. And it was more for the point of doing the action and getting out of bed and saying, I ain't taking this shit lying down. I'm just going to focus on something that I can achieve here, just for that sort of self-mastery, I think. So is there anything else that you want to unpack around those two things before we talk about other lessons that you or I may have learned from this that could be useful?
Yeah, I mean, to that point, Paul, I think just to focus on the fact that whatever situation you find yourself in, you always have a choice. And there's interesting research done on people who are in survival situations, right? Where some people, get lost in the woods and die, and other people live. And what the research says is the people that die, they get really mad that they're in this situation, and they say things like, "I can't believe this happened to me. This shouldn't happen to me." And they stay really angry at the situation. They never accept, that their ship is capsized in the ocean, or that they're lost in the middle of the woods or the desert or the jungle. And because their mind is focused on, this shouldn't have happened to me. So those people die. The people that live in survival situations, they think, okay, well, this is not how I thought today was going to go, but what's the single best decision that I can make right now to help myself? And so they think about that. Is it, try to find water or shelter or some way to signal? And so you focus on, what's the single best thing I can do to help myself survive, or what's the single best decision I can make right now? And then you do that. And then after you do that, then okay, what's the next thing I can do?
Yeah.
Right? And you just keep your mind consumed with, what's the next best choice I can make? And what you see is that those people tend to survive in these survivor, situations. But so if you don't, back to amor fati, if you don't accept your situation and you're angry that you're in the situation that you're in, you will undoubtedly do two things. You will do harm to yourself, and you will do harm to everyone around you, because you simply didn't have the ability to accept that it's my turn. And I remember saying that to myself when I was in the hospital, because everybody knows somebody who had cancer. And I remember just thinking, it's my turn. And I didn't think it was going to happen this way. I didn't think it was going to happen at all, but this is my turn. And so what am I going to do with my turn?
Yeah. I think you've really highlighted for me, and I kind of knew it, but it wasn't that overt, that the precursor, I think, to focusing on what you can control is acceptance. Mm-hmm. That is the enabler of focusing on what you can control. Because if we think about this from a broader perspective, you mentioned I didn't want to be a victim. There's a lot of people out there who are are fucking professional victims.
Yes.
And you will know some of these people, Stan, that this person's got it better than me, that person's got it better than me, and they are angry. But it's not just the anger, it's where their energy goes. It's the flashlight of their attention is shown on them being a victim. And I think the other thing that is really...
And it becomes their identity too.
Yes.
It becomes their defining thing about themselves, is I'm the person who's had all these terrible things happen to me. And then you're supposed to feel sorry for me, and you're supposed to treat me in some preferential way because of how difficult I've had it. And of course, if you actually did that to the person, you would do them a disservice.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think the thing that I often see, and I think is happening more and more, as well as a victim mentality, is an entitlement mentality. That people feel like they are entitled to having a good life and entitled to, whether it's not be offended or any of that. And I'm just like, this is fucking wrong. This is completely the wrong way to approach life, because it just puts people in a tailspin, and all of their attention and therefore their energy is focused on negative and woe is me, and they're just, it's that vacuum of where that energy could be. It's not just the damaging effect, it's that double thing. It's like if you have a shit diet, it's not just the fact that you're eating shit food that's causing you damage. It's also the fact that you've crowded out of your diet a lot of good nourishing food, so you actually end up with a double whammy. Any thoughts on that?
And that you don't value yourself enough to take care of you. And so I think, in our Western society, if we encounter someone who doesn't value and take care of themselves, it's very difficult for us to value them too. Like when you run into someone who's given up on themselves, it's really hard, especially in the business world and competitive environments. When you run into people who've given up on themselves, it's highly unlikely that the people around you are going to want to take you on as a project, because it takes a lot of energy. You can do it if it's a family member or a close friend, perhaps, but we don't normally do that in competitive environments and business environments. When we see people who've already given up on themselves, we tend to steer around them, because it can be exhausting to be in a relationship with someone like that.
Yeah, what I really struggle with, Stan? It's funny you mention that. When I see people who've given up on themselves, when I see friends who whether they've been through a marriage breakup and they're being a victim, I find it really hard not to have contempt for them. That's something, and it's interesting you mentioned that we tend to steer around them, because that's something that I really struggle with, is when I see someone who's not helping themselves. And maybe this is a personal fault of mine, but I have to force myself not to be contemptuous around those people. How do you, as a coach, get around that? Because you'll have seen and dealt with these people. Yeah, I need some tools here for me to deal with people who've given up on themselves.
Well, I think it's possible to have compassion for people who are suffering, and that is a form of suffering. And
interesting.
Like when I run into an angry person now, what I tell to myself is that person is hurt, because you don't become angry unless you're hurt first. And so when I see an angry person, I just tell myself this person is hurting, okay? And don't pay attention to the anger. Look for the hurt and see the hurt beneath the anger. So there are things like that we can do. I think the other thing I sometimes say to people is, do you want my help or do you want my advice on what's going on with you? And if you ask them, a lot of times they'll say yes, but they really don't want it. And I'll say, well, if my advice were to actually, in the short term, make you feel worse, would you want to hear it, right? Because sometimes the thing that the person needs to hear is not what they want to hear. Correct. It's not it's going to be okay, honey. It's going to be all right. And so I find it's helpful to say, I'll talk to you about this and I'll be honest with you, but I need to let you know that it's likely that I might say something that you don't like or is upsetting to you. But I also realize that there are probably some truths that other people haven't told them, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
There's an interesting Thomas Sowell saying that says, if you want to help someone, tell them the truth. If you want to help yourself, tell them what they want to hear. And I think we do that a lot. But I think, so what I'm getting to is, I think probably the best thing that you can do for a friend or a loved one is tell them the truth. And sometimes the truth is how you feel when you're in their presence, or the fact that you find yourself not wanting to be around them anymore, and you're troubled by that, but that's the reality. Yeah, it's, it's a risk to speak the truth. I think telling the truth is probably one of the most dangerous things that we do. I mean, if you really are, in a fully transparent and candid way telling the truth, I think it's very risky, and it's dangerous because there are people that if you tell them the truth, they're going to write you off for it, or they're not going to ever want to be in relationship with you again. I see it in the workplace all the time where people won't tell their boss what they really think. Or, like couples where they really won't tell their partner what they really think because they're afraid that, something bad will come of it, And so we create all these relationships where we just tiptoe around each other.
Yes.
As if telling the truth is a terrible thing. But the fact of the matter is the truth can be painful, but it doesn't damage you. And this is what a lot of people don't understand about the truth. It doesn't damage. It's kind of like getting a shot. When you get a shot, there's pain when the needle goes in, so you feel pain, but it's not harming you. It's just painful. And people need to understand that there's something that can be painful, but you're not being harmed by it. And I think, conversation with someone who will really tell you the truth would be that way. Where it would be painful. And so that's what I try to do with people is say, I got something I want to tell you, Paul, but I'm kind of reluctant to do it because I feel like if I say this to you, you might be mad at me and it might damage our friendship. And then I'll say, so, that said, do you want me to tell you? And almost always they say, yeah, tell me. So now you're asking me for it, you see?
Yes,
so that's
got permission.
That's kind of a nice,
permission.
Yeah, so that's back to answer your question. That's a nice tactic. If you have some really hard, difficult things to say to someone, ask them for permission and just say, I'm reluctant to tell you this because I'm afraid you're going to be hurt by it or angry, and I don't want that to go there. But at the same time, I don't want to be disingenuous. And then once they ask you, they'll say, yeah, I want you to tell me. That right there changes their response because now they've asked for it.
Yeah, no, that is gold advice. And actually, the other bit of advice that I liked from that is to look what's behind their behavior. The old saying, never judge somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. So from the anger, understanding that there's hurt behind the anger and to look for that. One thing I wanted to talk about, you kind of you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm becoming more and more focused on this idea of your flashlight of your attention, and it's something that I got from my wife from Japanese psychology, where they talk about the flashlight of your attention is the most important thing in your life. Because when you think about it from a neuroscience perspective, Stan, I think you'll agree that attention is a precursor for everything in the brain. It's a precursor for emotions and feelings. It's a precursor for action. Has this experience changed where you direct the flashlight of your attention, or where that flashlight lingers longer?
I think I'm more intentional about how I spend my time just because I feel like I have less of it. There's an urgency that I feel. So for example, last weekend I went down to Guadalajara, Mexico to visit a friend. And I think probably normally I wouldn't have done that. But I remember thinking to myself, this might be my only chance to go. And when I said that to myself, this will probably be my only chance, then I went. Versus I think if you talked to me 5 years ago, my response would have been, oh, there'll be another chance. There'll be another opportunity.
Yes.
Right? And now I realize, no, there's like a lot of things that you're going to do one last time. Or you're only going to have one opportunity in your whole life to do it. And what are you going to say? You're going to say yes or no. So I think I've been more open to doing some things that maybe you call it spontaneous, but I'll give you another just simple example. So I travel a good bit for work, and one of the things that I realized when I was in the hospital for so long is I don't mind the business travel and the work. What I really dislike is the hotel room, and the isolation of it. So
Yes.
I thought, well, if I can stay with friends instead, that would make it better. So, I reached out to some friends, and there's a company I work with in Dallas, and one of the guys who's a senior guy with the company I've known for a long time. And I told him, I said, look, let me just tell you what's going on. It's like, I don't want to stay in a hotel anymore. I want to stay at somebody's house. And his kids are grown like mine. And I was like, if you and your wife are comfortable, I would love to stay with you guys and find a way to reciprocate, take them out to dinner and whatnot. And so I've been doing that for a year now, and it's been wonderful. And, I really enjoy being there, and they enjoy having me. At least they act like they enjoy having me. And so it's just kind of a win-win thing. And so I think about that, of the things that you don't enjoy, but yet are still necessary. Find a way to make it more fulfilling.
Yeah, no,
and that sometimes means asking someone to help you. And I realize one of the things I realized being in the hospital is I don't mind it at all if people ask me for help, but I really have a hard time doing that. And I think I have this concern of I don't want to be a burden or a problem to someone. And I know there's kind of a wound there, that's about, because it doesn't bother me when people ask for help. But for some reason, I've really struggled to do that myself. And, I remember thinking I've got to work on that. I've got to be willing to ask for help or ask for what I need. The person can always say no, but, if you don't ask. But people who freely give, they'll tell you they get something out of giving, right?
Yes.
So, it works both ways.
Yeah.
So I was unbalanced in that way.
The urgency thing is really interesting. And similar to your story about going down to, I can't remember what he said, it was Mexico or whatever, to visit someone, because it might be that you get. Because I was hemming and hawing about going back to the UK before my operation, and then I actually thought to myself, fucking hell, I need to go just in case. And I called it my just in case visit. Right, and everything was so I'd visit my Navy mates, I'd visit my mates from uni, and I was like, we're going out to have a just in case party, just in case I didn't make it on the other side. Because I actually, I thought about it, and I thought, well, what would I regret if I did die on the operating table? What would I regret not having done? And that's the attitude that I had in facing my mortality was not to be negative, but to go, hey, I've got a shot here to do stuff or to not have any regrets, and so focusing that potential negative outcome on, well, what needs to be done, right? If you're going to cork it on the operating table, what would you have regretted not doing? And they were the things that I made myself do, right? But it then spills over, doesn't it, to your point that you start to live more in the moment and have more of that sense of urgency, because we actually are, when you're confronted with your own death, you realize, fucking hell, how not only precious, but just how, what's the word I'm looking for? How easily it can be gone, life.
Yeah. The other thing that came to me in all of this is, when someone has a family member or a friend that dies, we say, I'm sorry. In other words, we think of death as a bad thing, as an unfortunate thing. And kind of where I'm at with it right now is it's the next thing. I don't have to think of my death or anyone's death as a bad thing. I can think of it as that's the next thing that happens, right? It's like you weren't alive, and then you got born, and then you lived, then you died, and then whatever happens after that. Of course, there's a lot of theories on what happens when the physical body dies. Yes. And I'm no expert, but some of the things that people believe, I kind of have to chuckle at. But I think what happens when we die is that there's a handful of people who really loved us, and they miss us, and they and they grieve and they feel bad for a while. Like that's what I think happens when we die is the people who love us hurt, but we don't hurt. The person that died doesn't hurt. There's no
That's
pain.
right.
You know what I'm saying? If I'm the dead guy, there's no pain for me, but my
Yes.
loved ones there is. But anyway, what I'm getting to is like, do we have to think of death as this bad thing that we should all try to avoid at all costs? Like, how's that serving us? And again, I'm not saying like I want to die, but I'm just saying it's like it's you know, it's okay. You know, it's all right. You know, it's the next thing. And I don't know what it's going to be like, but you know, I'm kind of curious.
Yes,
You know?
yes.
I'd love to be an expert. I'd love to be one of these guys who, yeah, I died and came back, and I can tell you. But
I am where I've landed with this, and again, I think it's such a good exercise to really confront your own mortality. And unfortunately, you know, for most of us, we are forced into it from that situation. But I think it's an opportunity denied to many to be able to confront your own mortality. And the conclusion that I came to is that death is, when I go to die, when my number's up, I'm entering into life's last great adventure. Mm-hmm. That's it. It's the last adventure. And we go into it and we'll either know or we won't know, but it's life's last great adventure. And it's, as you said, it's just the next step. And I think if you can go
and the
there
dead
with
guy is not the one suffering. It's the loved ones of the dead guy that suffer. The dead person's free.
So is there something, Stan, that you would, having gone through that experience, that you would like your 18-year-old self to know, or some of the young people out there to know, or even anybody just in terms of lessons, but what's the poignant ones that you come through with this? Because I'm sure you analyzed it, that whole experience, given what you actually do, right? It's hard not to analyze and watch your own journey through that.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the hospital and my son and one of his best friends came to visit me one evening, and my son's friend is a really inquisitive, bright kid, and he was asking me about, you know, what I've learned from all this and what's changed. And I said, and what advice that I have, you know, and I said to him, I said, you know, just get on with your life. If there's something that you really want to do, don't wait around for the right time or the perfect situation. You know, live your life with a sense of urgency. And because if you don't, then you're waiting to start your life. Yes. And that's terrible. So anyway, I didn't know it at the time, and I found out later, but this kid, he went to his job the next day or that week, and he quit his job and he started his own business that he was wanting to do. And he told me about it later. And I said, well, thank God it's working out for you. Otherwise I would have felt like an ass, you know? But just that sense of like, you know, what do you want to do with this one wild and precious life that you have?
Yes.
Because you're not going to have it for much longer.
Yes.
You know, and so the thing that you've been thinking about doing that you haven't had the courage to do, you know, when you're dead, you're going to have the courage because you're not going to be afraid anymore, but you ran out of time.
It's interesting because I had written down the thing for me to coach myself or others: seize opportunities, seize them. And it's aligned with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this research from Richard Wiseman, who's a British psychologist and a very, very good one, but has studied lucky people in the UK, right? And he did this massive study where he advertised, and he's been on TV and all sorts of stuff, right? So he designed this study where he advertised he wanted people who were unlucky and people who were lucky. And so he got a whole heap of volunteers. And being in the UK, there was clearly more people who felt they were unlucky than they were lucky. But he basically did a series of experiments and analysis of these people and found that lucky people are actually no luckier than unlucky people. They just take their opportunities, because when an opportunity comes, they have an optimism bias and they actually go, I'm going to go and do this. Whereas the unlucky people, because of their filter, they still have opportunities, but they either don't see the opportunities or they don't take them because they go, that'll not work out for me, or the time isn't right. And to your point, Stan, if the time isn't right, it might be your only time. You might not get another shot.
Yeah, I heard a really interesting thing the other day. It was on a TV show called Landman. Billy Bob Thornton plays a oil guy in West Texas, and he's giving advice to his teenage daughter, who has a boyfriend at the time, and he says, every relationship that you have is going to fail except for the last one. And the kid's like 17. So if this relationship that you have with a boyfriend, if this isn't the last one, it's going to fail. And I wish someone had said that to me when I was young. Like, every relationship you have is going to fail. It's going to end. There's going to be a breakup, and there'll probably be some heartache. But if you're lucky, the last one, there won't be. It still might be difficult. But I think about that same, thought process applies to a lot of things. Like sometimes you have to take a job that you don't want so that you can get the job that you do want.
Yes.
Right? And that was one of the pieces of advice I gave my son when he just came along. Is like, take this job not because you want it, but take this job because it's going to help you get the job that you want. And I see a lot of people, they're really reluctant to do that. It's like, I don't want to do that. But if you understood that it was, it's like it's part of your path, and there's on your journey, there's uphill, right? And there's days where you walk in the rain, and that's all part of the journey. It's not, slightly downhill with the wind at your back. That's not what anyone gets. But I think a lot of people don't understand that doing the difficult thing or the thing that you necessarily don't want in that moment is actually what's going to make you become the person that you want to be. It's that saying of, hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make hard times. I thought about that a lot as well. It's like, so the question is, do you want to be a strong person? Yes. Okay, then you must embrace the hard times. Yeah. Right. And that's back to where we started, where it's like, I think most people, if you ask them what they really want, what they'll tell you is they want their life to be, when they say they want to be happy or whatever, they want their life to be easier. They don't want to struggle as much as they are. But I think the struggle is absolutely necessary. So I would say is you want to, if your life is not going well or if you feel stuck, chances are you're not struggling enough. You're not taking on enough difficulty, and you're not taking on enough responsibility. You actually have to make things more difficult and challenging for yourself. That's how you get unstuck.
Yeah, you've got to get into the contest of life, I think, is the key thing. Is you've got to be in it, and you've got to look at it that life is a contest. I think that's one that the Stoics really imprinted upon me. Is that,
but the competition is with yourself.
Exactly. And he said, the Olympic Games are upon us. There is no time to waste, right? Which is that sense of urgency again. The thing that, or one of the things that really landed for me in that, what advice would I give myself or my younger self, or would I give, or have I given my kids, is to give more than you take. And from that, I mean, from an energy perspective, from a relationship perspective, and any group that you're in, is to have the attitude to give more than you take. So to be a positive ball of energy. Because as I think about this, we're all just little blots of energy, right? If you were to zoom out over your town and my town, you see all of these little dots of energy, and they're just bumping into each other, right? And some of them, they're like, I have this kind of vision of, some of them are colored red, and they're angry, and they're bouncing off all these other little balls, and they're making them turn more red, and that's having a knock-on effect, right? And when you think about this, it's like, you impact the energy of everybody that you interact with through your energy. So my thing with my kids is really just you need to give more than you take, and not go into relationships or not go into workplaces or whatever it is thinking that I want to take more than I give. If we can flip that around, I think that is one of the keys to a life of flourishing. Not an easy life, but a life of flourishing.
Yeah. When I was in the hospital, I had my girlfriend bring my little speaker, and so I'd play music. And when the people would come in to clean the room, I would ask them, "What's your favorite music?" And they would tell me, or I would just say, "Hey, do you like this?" And I'd turn it up. But when the people would come and clean my room, I'd turn the music up really loud, and kind of, dance around with them.
Yes.
And
yes.
I remember thinking, like, imagine having the job of cleaning hospital rooms of people that are literally dying. Like, that's a shitty job. And I remember thinking, like, if I can, give this woman, 10 minutes of joy. And it worked. And it made me feel better because I could see how happy they were. And by the end of the month I was there, they're like, "Oh, I love coming to clean your room, Dr. Beecham, because you're going to play good music. We're going to have fun." I said, "Yeah, why not?" And I don't know how that came to me, but I'm glad that it did. But I mean, it's not like a difficult thing, I mean, it's just doing 100 of those little things to yourself and to other people.
Yes.
Again, the walk away lesson for me is that the joy of life is doing the simple things with grace. Like, I walk every day now. I walk an hour in the morning, I walk an hour in the afternoon, and I look forward to it. And it's, going for a walk is such a simple thing, but I get such joy out of it, or bumping into people and saying hey to them. I mean, that's it.
Yes. And actually, to that point, the thing that one of the things that changed when I got out is I stopped walking with my earbuds in, because I used to go out and take my dogs out for a walk every morning and every evening when I'm around, and I like to do it at sunset, but sunrise and sunset, but I used to listen to podcasts because I'm thinking I'll kill two birds with one stone here, and I took my earbuds out and just have forced myself to be present, to listen to the birds in the morning, to look at the change of light, to see my dogs fucking having such a great time sniffing around. It's those little moments, isn't it? And if we can, and that's, I guess, the essence of what the Buddhist talks about with mindfulness. It's not sitting fucking cross-legged in a lotus pose. It's actually just being fully engaged in life, in all that it has to offer, isn't it?
Yep. And there's a lot that life offers us, and we miss it, because we're caught up in something else. Usually ourselves, our concern for ourselves, What would your life look like if you were free from concern about how you were doing? What would happen to you if you didn't think about yourself much anymore? You thought about other people or other things. The answer is your quality of life would go up significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Stan, this has been, as usual, for the third time, so much good shit to think about. And mate, you are the epitome of the Stoic play your given roles well. So I tip my hat to you, sir. What's one thing that you are very much looking forward to now that you've had that second chance from the universe?
Watching my kids and my grandchild grow up and just seeing, what they become, that's still exciting. And watching where I live, there's kids around, and I love watching, see how they change, and just the, just the day-to-day growth, or year-to-year growth that you see with kids. I just think it's amazing. And so that's, I think that's probably the thing that I'm most interested and curious about what's going to happen. Is, how are these people that I know and I've watched them from day one, and, how, when they're full-grown adults, what does that look like? I think that's the thing I'm most interested in. And then the other thing is I'm 63 now, so I don't know, I live 20 more years. I don't know what it is, but how do I age? Do I age gracefully? Do I, I'm just kind of curious to see kind of what's next. because there's going to be a next thing, and I'm really curious to see what that is and how I respond to it.
Yeah. I love that, the curiosity bit. And actually, what's written on my bathroom mirror right now is growing old is a privilege denied to me.
Yeah, I like that. Growing old is a privilege denied to many. I'll remember that, Paul. Thank you for that one.
Very cool. I think you need to write a book on this, Sam. Stan. Yeah.
Oh, really?
I think there's another book of what you learned.
Okay.
Because you've got not only amazing insights that you've amassed over your years, but you have just a way of fucking delivering those insights with impact. I often say the best thing that anybody ever said on my podcast was you saying, in order to optimize your life, you need to take on as much challenge and responsibility as you can tolerate. And every now and then you need to walk right to the edge of yourself and stare into the abyss. Like that.
Look over the edge. Yeah.
Look over the edge. Take on the
walk
lessons.
right up to the edge. Don't jump. Just look over. Yeah.
And me and you have had the benefit of actually really looking into the abyss now and walking back and taking on the lessons. So that actually, in retrospect, and I know you're the same because you said it at the start, is actually a privilege to be able to really stare into the abyss and to walk back
and not be eternally wounded by it.
Yes, very true.
Yeah,
very cool. Dr.
Thank
Stanley
you, Paul.
Beecham, you are friggin' awesome. So where can people go to find more about you and get your awesome book, Elite Minds, which they have to get, and also where they'll be able to find your next book when you've managed to write it?
Well, you buy everything on Amazon now, right? So the book, that's the best place to get it is Amazon. And then I have a website, drstanbeecham.com, and you can track me down that way. Or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Thanks, Stan.
All right.
I will
Thank you.
look forward to seeing you again. Cheers, mate.
Okay.